You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Good morning. I'm Kathryn Zox. I'm your social worker with the microphone, and you're listening to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show here at the University at Albany. I'm your co-host with Alyssa Lotmore. How are you this morning, Alyssa?
I'm great. Glad to be here today.
Alyssa is now a professor at the School of Social Welfare, a former student.
I wouldn't go as far as professor, but I am assisting with a class.
Well, you went from professor to assisting with a class. That's okay. And Ethan Ullman on the board. Well, this is our show of the month. So if you don't get an opportunity to listen to the show live today here at WCDB University at Albany, if you can't hear it live today, then you can listen to it on. Are you going to download? Ethan Ullman is our board op, so Ethan will download the show. He's recording it today, and we'll send you the link so that you can listen anytime. Joining us this morning is Dr. Eric Hardiman, PhD, Associate Professor at the School of Social Welfare at the University at Albany. Dr. Hardiman conducts research on peer-delivered support interventions, this is very social work, lots of words, right, across a range of populations and service domains, including those addressing mental health, homelessness, disaster relief, urban violence, and veterans communities, which we're going to be discussing today. And also joining us with Dr. Hardiman is Joel Abelove, veteran, attorney, and director of peer service for Heroes at Home. PFC Joseph Dwyer Peer Support Program serving veterans and their families in Rensselaer County. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we'll start with Dr. Hardiman, only because he's racing out of here, he said in a few minutes, but he's going to give us more than that. So, okay, how did you become involved in the program, Dr. Hardiman? Can I call you Eric?
Sure,
okay.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, too. Thanks for having both of us. I got involved in this program because of my research work looking at peer support. And my work has been predominantly, before this, has been in mental health, looking at various types of support that people with psychiatric disabilities provide to each other. And so I've become very interested throughout my research career looking at how people help each other, people with shared lived experiences. So a person with schizophrenia helping another person with schizophrenia, for example. And I found out about this program, which started a year and a half ago, roughly, because it involves veterans helping other veterans, and that's a key component of the program, is really peer support between veterans, with the idea being, and Joel can help explain this better than I can certainly, but the idea being that veterans will listen to and experience help from each other in different ways than they might from professionals like social workers, because they've lived the same experience.
But as I understand it, the goal also, and maybe we should talk specifically before we go on. Joel, welcome to the show. Maybe you can describe specifically the Heroes at Home, the program, and then we can get more specific about the questions about what you're doing and how it operates.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on today. I appreciate this opportunity to come and speak with your listeners about this program, because it is very new and we're still pushing the word out there about the program. And the idea behind it is exactly as Eric had said. In Rensselaer County, we've implemented our program for the last year and a half along those lines of helping not just the veterans but their family members, who are the first line of protection for the veterans, who can assess how they're doing, but also to provide support for those family members, because they serve right alongside their veteran family member, and it's important to make sure that they are supported as well. So we've partnered with many agencies, many other veteran help agencies that provide different services to veterans. We are primarily mental health focused. We're not counselors, we're not therapists, but we're peer support. Meaning it's like the battle buddy system. For anybody who's been in the military, they understand what that is. If you've gone through similar experiences, if you've struggled with the same types of issues that veterans have, you're much more likely to trust somebody who's been down that same road, and you're much more likely to be able to make that connection with somebody who has been there and done that, and open up to them and help communicate your concerns to them.
And Joel, as I understand it, though, the ultimate goal after they've received the peer support is to get professional help. Is that the direction that you're going in?
Well, certainly if we feel at any time that a veteran or their family member needs professional support from a licensed professional, from a therapist or from a physician, we'll make that referral as soon as we feel that's necessary. So it may not be the ultimate goal in every case, but it's an option that's available if and when needed. And certainly it may happen at the same time that we're providing peer support. We are an additional service there for the veteran and his or her family member to receive support.
And and maybe Eric, you can answer this question, what are the criteria? Does someone have to be suffering, for instance, from post-traumatic stress disorder, or can they just feel that they need help, either the individual, the vet, him or herself, and the family?
In most counties, this program, just to give a little further context, the program is being implemented in 11 counties statewide, and the funding came from the New York State Senate. Senator Lee Zeldin it started the program essentially and got some support from other senators and was able to garner the funds for this program, and the counties are very appreciative for that. And so each county has been able to implement the program in slightly different ways, in ways that contextually make sense for that specific county. Most counties, most of those 11 counties, really have very flexible criteria for inclusion in the program, and that's on purpose. That's essentially so that veterans who need help can get it, regardless of whether they've been a veteran for a day or a year or 10 years, regardless of what their specific issue might be or what their specific challenges might be. That there really is a strong emphasis on inclusion, so that the criteria are not super defined.
So, how long can someone remain in the program, Joel?
Joel, maybe.
Sure. We don't place a time limit on how long someone can stay in the program with us. It's basically as long as they feel they need to. We are there for them whenever they want to talk. If they want to terminate services with us, that's fine. If they want to talk to somebody different, that's fine. We are basically there for them as long as they need us. And we are open to all veterans from all generations, whether they deployed overseas or not. Doesn't matter. We're here for the veteran and their family. Doesn't even matter their type of discharge they got when they left their branch of service. So
reintegration, I guess, is the key word.
Absolutely.
Reintegration into the community, individual
Yes.
and families.
Absolutely, and that's been our focus, because that is such a struggling point for veterans, is that reintegration into society once they have gotten themselves adapted to the military lifestyle, and especially if they've deployed overseas into a combat zone. They've developed certain coping mechanisms that work really, really well when you're overseas, but that don't work so well perhaps once you get home. The avoidance, not wanting to be around people, hypervigilance, things of that nature. They all keep you alive overseas, but they're an impediment once you get back into quote-unquote normal society. So we try to help them to reintegrate into society and help them with the struggles that they do have. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with the statistics that we're experiencing approximately 22 suicides a day nationwide by veterans. That's a horrific statistic, and it's something that this program is designed to combat.
Yeah. And it seems to me you have very specific principles, very specific goals. I did some of my homework before we got on the show, but you take this holistic approach, which I think is important, obviously, as social workers. Can you describe it in detail, either Dr. Hardiman or Joel, what the holistic approach in terms of what you do as a peer support group?
Sure. Well, we offer a number of different ways that veterans can get involved with our program. Some people might be more comfortable with a one-on-one scenario, talking to a peer support volunteer. Other people might be more comfortable in a group, and we've had a number of group outings and picnics where we get veterans and their families together so that these types of supportive relationships can organically grow out of the group setting. Because when you put veterans in a room together or at a picnic, they'll start talking to each other because they have that bond, they have that experience in common. So we found that when you say this holistic approach, we try to view it from the standpoint that there are multiple ways to reach these veterans and get them reconnected, which is often the biggest challenge when veterans return from military life or from deployment overseas, to get them reconnected and feeling as though they're part of society again, and that they can trust people, that they have something to look forward to. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and that's, I think, very important. And as well, these veterans may have a multitude of issues, which is why our partnerships with other veteran help agencies or not-for-profits is very important, because they might not just be struggling with PTSD, but they may have housing issues or employment or educational issues.
Or legal issues. You're an attorney.
Yes, or legal issues. And it's very important to be able to hook them up with the right services, which ultimately will help their mental well-being.
Yeah. You mentioned the word reconnection and reconnection to the community, but I'm also thinking of reconnection to the family. It would seem to me, I mean, that's kind of a core piece of the program, getting families reconnected.
Absolutely, and sometimes we'll hear from the spouse or the girlfriend or the boyfriend of the veteran who's returned home, because they're more cognizant of the issues that are going on with their loved one who's the veteran, and they'll reach out to us and say, my husband really needs some help. He's not going to come and ask you for it, but can you call him? And that's why we're here for the families as well, because they're the ones who are around those veterans on a daily basis and can sense when something isn't right. So for us to be there for the whole family is really a way to support the veteran themselves. Ultimately, at the end of the day, how we do that is really unimportant. It's the fact that we're able to do it, and that reconnection with the family is so important, because we're not going to be there for them every day, and the family members are. So they do need to learn how to reconnect. After you've been away for a year, it doesn't matter where you go. You could go to Disney World for a year. If you come back, your life is going to feel different. Your family will have changed. Now you can imagine going overseas into a combat zone for a year and coming back and having to readjust to how your family has gotten along without you being there, how they've had to adjust, how your children have had to adjust. So emotionally and psychologically and practically speaking, everything has changed. And trying to readjust to that quote-unquote new normal is the challenge.
Now, are there any types of services before deployment that individuals can use to sort of prepare themselves, or some sort of coping mechanisms that they can use to help them be able to adjust better when they return?
Well, I'll tell you, that's probably one of the biggest unexplored areas. Just speaking from my own personal experience having deployed, certainly the military does a fantastic job at preparing you for your experience overseas when you go to a combat zone, and that's what you're focused on. It's not really the focus to say, okay, this is what's going to happen to you psychologically when you're over there, and this is what it's going to be like for you to return. There are family readiness groups. There are certainly support groups that are out there. But when you're getting ready to go overseas, it's very difficult to try to focus on what it's like once you come home. Your primary focus is on the mission and how to keep yourself and your troops along with you alive and to successfully complete your mission. So perhaps that's something that needs to be addressed in the future, is to place some more emphasis on assisting military service members in preparing for what it's going to be like when they come back. Absolutely.
Because I was thinking of disaster preparedness. I mean, we try to do that in other areas. I mean, Eric, obviously you're familiar with that, but this is kind of a very different kind of different issue.
Yeah, I think, from a research perspective, we're learning what works and what doesn't work with populations like veterans, and certainly thinking in a more preventive way is an area for the future, trying to figure out what would this be like when you do come back, as Joel put it. And I agree. I think that's an area for exploration that's really ripe and really an important question to ask.
I guess just knowing that there is a system in place is the first start, so that it's not kind of fishing around like what's available. The Veterans Administration, how do they fit into this picture? Or do you work with them? Or?
Yes, we do. They are one of our partners, as a matter of fact, and representatives from the VA sit on a lot of the same coalitions that Heroes at Home takes part in. So, we can make referrals to the VA. They offer a number of wonderful services. But a lot of veterans, for one reason or another, have become hesitant to go to the VA, whether it's a travel thing and maybe they live out in a rural part of the county and they don't want to travel into the VA. Maybe they've had a bad experience at the VA, or they've heard about bad experiences at the VA, whether true or not. And so for whatever reason, some veterans are reticent to take advantage of the services at the VA. we are a grassroots community level support organization that will come to these veterans. We'll work with them in their communities so they don't have to feel as though they're trudging down to the VA and having to stand in line and all the other things that may in their mind be a stigma to utilizing the Veterans Administration.
Joel, how do you specifically then minimize the barriers to treatment? Because that's what you're talking about.
Sure. Well, I think it all begins with trust, and that's why the foundation of our program of veterans helping other veterans helps to build that trust. And once that veteran who's struggling is able to forge a bond with a peer support volunteer, and they trust them, then they're much more likely to heed their advice and their suggestions that they perhaps seek some additional professional help. But without somebody who has been down that road before to point them in the right direction and assure them that it might be the better thing for them to try to do, it's very difficult to motivate some veterans to get the help that they really do need.
It seems like it is such a big issue, and I know our 11 counties have a great resource. Is there other counties and other locations that have similar types of programs, or what are the resources for a lot of the other veterans in the United States?
I mean, one of the things that's interesting right now nationally is that this is really a hot topic in the sense that there are so many veterans coming back, and we're starting to become aware through research and through programs like Joel's about the needs of veterans. And so there's just a real multitude of resources in almost every community across the states. The problem is that veterans don't always know about those resources, or in some cases they are experiencing isolation themselves and they're not ready to receive formal services. So even in areas where there are formal support services like the VA or like other veterans help agencies, sometimes bridging that connection to get someone through the front door is not an easy process. And so that's why a program like the Dwyer programs that are in these 11 counties can really help, because they can do outreach. They can go, I've seen in some counties where they will go to motorcycle clubs, for example, to find veterans. And so there's an outreach to the community to really find out where people are, because it's not that veterans are coming through the door all the time. And so that's a real challenge, is how do you find people who are not presenting themselves to you?
Eric, Dr. Hardiman, what about the difference between the males and females, men and women? We've had a couple of women vets on the show, I think, haven't we, Alyssa, in the past, that we've interviewed, and there must be some gender differences in terms of reintegration and coming back. I mean, what's been your experience?
Yeah, we're just getting into the data on that, so I can't really answer that yet. It does seem like there are some differences. Joel may have some experiences here in Rensselaer County. It seems like of the 11 counties that are implementing Dwyer programs, almost all of them have at least one or two of their veteran volunteers who are female, and that's an important part to them, is that for women that are veterans who would like another woman to speak to who's also a veteran, that's a possibility. That brings up, and I want to let Joel answer that question, but it also brings up another point, that each program is using veterans to deliver these services, to deliver the supports. And so it also offers for both men and women, sort of a career opportunity for them as well, too, to learn how to use their own life experience to help someone else. But Joel may be able to answer the gender question.
Sure. We do have a mix between men and women who have stepped up and become peer support volunteers in the Rensselaer County program, which is fantastic because that's certainly needed. We have men and women who are coming home, and there may be women who are much more comfortable speaking with another woman, and men who are comfortable talking to another man. On our advisory board that we formed, we have people from all different agencies of both genders. We have a Gold Star mother who's on our advisory board. So it's important to have people from a lot of different backgrounds and experiences to offer input into how we really build this program from scratch. My partner who helps me run this program, Amy Malloy, is a social worker, and she has a background working with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So we found that it's a very good fit because Amy gets to bring the whole mental health side of the house and her experiences to our program, and my being in the military and having been in the military for quite a period of time, brings all the military connections and experiences to the program. So we work very well together to blend those two aspects and try to provide the best services that we can to our veterans and their families.
What have been some of the most difficult things that in this particular program that you've experienced? I mean, some of the things that have really stood in the way of you being able to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I guess that question is for both of you.
Well, I think just being a new program and getting the word out there to the public. I don't want to say there's a glut of veteran help programs, but if you Google it, it sure seems like it. And I think to a certain extent the public is overwhelmed with the number of different not-for-profits and governmental veteran support agencies. And you throw another one into the mix and you may get lost in the shuffle with a lot of other ones. So being able to get our message out, to become recognized as a local community-based peer support program has been the challenge for us. And it's not that we can't do it. We are doing it. It just takes some time. And we're kind of impatient. We want to help every veteran today. So getting out into the communities is important. I've spoken at the Combat Veterans Motorcycle Club meetings. I've spoken at American Legion meetings and VFWs and local veterans organizational meetings. And we're trying to push the word out there, and we're doing it through our website, through Facebook, through going to different events and honoring veterans, whether it's the seniors of the Troy Housing Authority that I've done, or just the other night we had a nice benefit dinner for the Hillside North Community Neighborhood Association in Troy, and we honored 20 veterans that live in their neighborhoods. And that's an opportunity to get those veterans in and get them connected to our program if they feel they need it. It's just a way of getting the word out there.
So awareness is key, obviously, and getting it out there. Presentations you've described, electronic media. I'm really curious is how does electronic media play into this? How well does it play into it?
You have to, I guess, in this day and age. Certainly when I was growing up, it was non-existent. But now I don't think you can have an organization like ours without availing yourself of everything that electronic media has to offer. Because the first question that people ask you are, do you have a website? Do you have a Facebook page? How do we get a hold of you? And to be able to push out all the good things that your organization is doing, you have to be on electronic media to promote yourself and to make people aware of your program. You have to be on electronic media. We just recently, for our program in Rensselaer County, hired 2 veterans who retired from the New York Army National Guard, a couple of great guys who are military community liaisons who are going to be out there in the communities, staffing local drop-in centers and truly being there as part of the communities and having their pulse on what's going on. And they are going to be playing a big role in our electronic media effort to provide timely updates on our Facebook and websites and to push that message out there in every form that we can.
Drop-in centers you mentioned. Let's talk about those.
Well, there's something that we always wanted to do because, again, people in a rural community may not want to track all the way into Albany as they see it. It's a hike for some people. And if they're feeling isolated to begin with, they're really not going to want to go down to Albany to the VA. So having local drop-in centers is important because then you're right there in the community, and people can, if they know you have set hours, they can just drop in, they can obtain information, they can gain knowledge, and knowledge is power, and they don't have to drop in right away and start talking to somebody, but they can get information, they can take it back to their neighborhoods, and they can spread the word. So it's a way to reach some of the most vulnerable in our veteran population because those who we seek to help the most are probably the least likely to go and ask for help. So being plugged right in the community and having the knowledge that all those local community members have is going to be key to reach those most vulnerable veterans.
Is being stigmatized a problem? You know, I grew up in a small town, and I'm thinking, I'm dropping in, I am a hero, I'm a veteran, and now I'm going to a drop-in place because I'm having issues or problems, and people are everybody's going to know about it.
Well, nobody's going to know about it unless they see you walk in. Our program is completely confidential. It's totally free, of course. It doesn't cost the veterans or family members anything. And I think the stigma, unfortunately, is always going to be there to a certain extent. I'm still in the military, and I've counseled as an attorney in the military a lot of service members who have had difficulties, who've had substance abuse problems, and who have had mental health problems because of deployment issues that they've had. And for them, they have the added stigma of not wanting to get help because of how it may affect their career in the military. So certainly that whole the whole thing you're taught as a military member of being tough and
Be strong.
and be strong and not let anything affect you, and to sort of suck it up and just deal with it. That's a good thing in that it prepares you to do the job that you have to do in the military. But it's counterproductive when it comes to seeking help for mental health issues. So that's a challenge. That's always going to be a challenge. But I think having that drop-in center where somebody can drop in their neighborhood might be a little less stigmatizing than, for some people, going down to the VA and feeling as though they're going to run into a whole lot of people and who might recognize them. It's just an option. It's a different path for somebody to be able to take to stop in and get some information. And then link up with us. They don't have to come and talk at the drop-in center. We can meet you at Stewart's and have a cup of coffee.
You know, you have a systems approach, obviously, a family systems approach. So I'm thinking, what about the children? What happens to the children? Do you address these issues in the school? How does that work?
Well, that's one of the areas that we've certainly talked about of getting into the schools so that guidance counselors and principals will have our information, because I know when I deployed, I went and I spoke to my son's principal and said, listen, I'm going to be going away for a year. Please keep an eye on my son. If you notice any issues, this might be why. So to educate our educators and let them know that these children may struggle with their loved one being deployed, and even afterwards is something to be aware of. Down the road, we certainly want to incorporate that component into our program a little bit more, is to be there for the children of these veterans, because in many ways they suffer even more because they don't understand why their family member had to go away and why they had to be scared about them perhaps not ever coming back.
And I think the media, and I'd like both of you to comment on this. Eric, maybe you first, but they glamorize the coming home, and you watch these programs on television where dad walks into the classroom and everyone's hugging and kissing and crying, and it seems like the end of a Cinderella story. And somehow that there's a piece of that bothers me because it's not realistic, and it sort of sets other people up for thinking, wow, maybe there's something wrong with us because we haven't had that experience when dad or mom came back from war.
Yeah, it does seem like what happens often, and it's not every case, but what happens often is that people come back from wartime situations and there's an immediate response, and people surround them with support very quickly. But for many veterans, what I hear from them is that very quickly afterwards there's a what next moment where that happens and it fades away very quickly, and then they're left in a situation where, as Joel said, the sort of defense mechanisms, the things that the coping strategies they've used in wartime situations or in deployment situations are no longer relevant where they are now. They don't have jobs, they don't have meaningful activities in some cases, they maybe don't have friends or people to talk to. And when you've been through such an intense experience, it really helps. What we're hearing in our research is that it helps to have someone who's been through a similar experience, who can share that, who gets it. Sometimes they don't even have to talk to each other. Sometimes it's just being there with each other. That sense that, okay, you've been there too, I've been there. And there's an immediate bond, an immediate conversation that can happen that, I haven't been deployed, I'm not in the military, so I can't do that with someone who's a veteran. But Joel can, and folks that Joel works with can.
All right, we're going to take a short break right now because I know Dr. Hardiman has to leave. He has other things he has to do, but it's been great having you on the show today, and thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yep, and we'll be back. I'm Kathryn Zox. I'm your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show with Alyssa Lotmore and Ethan Ullman on the board, WCDB University at Albany. And we'll be back in a minute because we're going to talk to Joel a little bit more about his personal experience. So don't go away.
Welcome back to the Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
We're back, and you're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany. I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, with my co-host, Alyssa Lotmore, Ethan Ullman on the board, and Joel Abelove. What a perfect name, Abelove, for the work that you do.
Well, thank you. I'll have to thank my parents for that.
All right, well, and we've been talking about this Heroes at Home program, PFC Joseph Dwyer Peer Support Program, serving veterans and their families in Rensselaer County. Joel, what your official title there is
Peer Support Coordinator?
He's the Peer Support Coordinator, for those of you who are just joining us. So, we want to hear, I think, first of all, maybe on a more personal level, how the Heroes at Home program got started, because it really is a result of one man's experience, one veteran's experience, and not a good one.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, PFC Joseph Dwyer was an OIF veteran, served in Iraq, came home, and unfortunately, ultimately took his own life. And a few years ago, a Senate subcommittee on veterans' mental health issues, chaired by Senator Lee Zeldin and then Senator Roy McDonald, held a series of hearings where they received testimony from different members of the community, whether it's mental health professionals or veterans. And I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to testify in front of their committee and talked about my experiences. And as a result of all the testimony that they received, they decided that this peer support program was necessary. So they instituted some funding for it. There were 4 initial counties that were funded. It is now expanded, as we know, to 11 counties altogether. And Rensselaer County was one of the initial 4. And we were given some money and given a mission. And for veterans, for people who've served in the military, you know what to do when you're given a mission. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because a lot of the veterans who come home and they're struggling and if they're not in the service anymore, especially, they've lost a lot of the ties that they have to that sense of purpose. And to give them a mission is important, and to help them reconnect is important, because by and far, veterans are outstanding citizens. They just need some help, and they're struggling with issues that are just normal reactions to very abnormal circumstances. There's nothing wrong with them. They've just adjusted the way they mentally process certain events to adapt to their environment. And the challenge is assisting them so that they can make that readjustment back to civilian society and quote-unquote normal life.
You said normal life. Just for our listeners, what are some of the things, if you're a veteran out there and you're having these feelings, what are some of the feelings that or experiences that you're talking about when you say, these are a normal response?
Sure. Many veterans who've deployed experience a multitude of symptoms when they come home. They experience hypervigilance. They are very cautious around crowds or other people. They're very adverse to being around certain situations because it was dangerous for them before to do that. And it can be really small, simple things. When you're taught every day to watch where you step and to not touch anything on the ground because it could blow you up, when you arrive at the mall, you get out of your car, and there's a piece of garbage on the ground, and you find yourself instinctively stepping around it or stepping over it rather than kicking it or picking it up. That affects how you behave when you get home. If you can't function in large crowds, if you find yourself driving down the middle of the road across a double yellow line at high speeds because you're trying to avoid the sides of the road where IEDs are usually placed, when you're scared of driving underneath overpasses because you're waiting for somebody to drop a grenade down the sunroof of your car from that overpass. Those are things that civilians who've never deployed don't have to think about or have never had to worry about. When you come home and you're used to carrying a weapon on you every single day, and now you don't have that, you may feel a little bit naked. You may feel unprepared to deal with what might come your way. That was a level of protection that you were able to provide for yourself, so you may feel vulnerable. All of these things can really impact your ability to function in day-to-day life when you get back.
Do we have any data in terms of prognosis? I mean, we talk about unfortunately, we talk about the suicide rate every day in this country with veterans. But in terms of if a veteran does get treatment, does get help, such as this program and maybe others as well, any kind of data that says it works, that
Well,
we're preventing some of these traumatic events from happening?
Sure. I think it's always difficult to show when you've prevented a suicide, right? Because, I mean, unless you just look at the overall numbers, and if they go down from one year to the next, perhaps you can say empirically that you've been succeeding. Whether it's because of our program or other factors, it may be difficult to tell. And I'm not familiar enough with all the data to speak to that intelligently, but I've got to believe that the efforts that we're putting forth are making a difference because we can see the difference. And if you're helping to lift somebody up and give them hope, that's a positive thing. And whether I'm ever shown data that it's making a difference or not, I know that it's making a difference, and that's what's important.
What about your personal story? Because, like we've talked about, I mean, you were in the military, you came back, you went through this whole process.
Right.
How difficult was it for you?
Well, and I'm still in the military, so it's something that I still have to deal with from that aspect. I'm still in the National Guard. To hear the last conversation we had was interesting because I had the great homecoming. I remember getting off the bus, and my family was there. My daughter, who had just turned 5 while I was gone, jumped into my arms, and it was a wonderful feeling, and being home is a wonderful feeling. But it's also a little overwhelming. Small things like seeing grass for the first time in 10 months or trees, little things like that really have to be absorbed slowly. And for me, I went back to work at my civilian job 2 weeks after coming home. And that was a little bit overwhelming, to say the least, because I don't think I was fully prepared to just jump right back into my civilian job. So there's a lot of things that can overwhelm you very quickly when you come home, whether it's employment or family or just your surroundings. And Eric was correct. As soon as you sort of get past that initial euphoria and excitement about being home, reality sets in, and you find yourself having to deal with the way your mindset has become over the last year and how that fits into society. And you start experiencing some of the problems that exist when you don't want to be around other people, if you feel isolated or if you feel hypervigilant.
Well, getting back to Alyssa, your question earlier, like being, preparing a veteran for coming back, but I'm thinking about perhaps you can prepare families before the veteran does come back, because they can sit down with a counselor or a peer support person and really get very specific about looking or understanding exactly what you've been talking about, those issues of how having to adapt as you described.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure for family members there's that euphoria of having their loved one home, and then for them reality sets in that the person who they said goodbye to a year ago is no longer the same person. And that can be depressing, it can be upsetting, it can cause anxiety, it can cause relationship issues. There can be a lot of problems that end up, rearing their ugly heads when suddenly the person that you're welcoming home isn't the same person that you were expecting home.
Now, are there types of support networks for the families? I mean, we talk about veterans, after they return. Are there any types of support programs for, the wife when their husband comes home and is not the same? Is there a network of peer support for women or, for the spouse?
Right. I think historically a lot of that has been lacking. What exists has sort of sprung up on its own out of necessity, where some very courageous wives who I've seen online have started their own support networks. Rather than waiting for somebody in government to figure it out, they went and they did it themselves, which is tremendous. That type of self-reliance is something that we should promote. You don't have to wait for a program to come and help you if you see a need. But I think historically it has been an area that's been lacking. There are support networks and family readiness groups and things of that nature, but for myself and my family, being in the National Guard, it's different from units that are on active duty, because active duty units come home and they all come home together and they come home to the same base and their families are often around each other and their kids go to school together. National Guard and Reserve units don't have that. They come home and then they disperse back to their lives all across the state or even out of state from the unit that they deployed with. And they don't have that support network built right in of the people who they just went through those shared experiences with, and the families don't have each other as active duty service members' families may have. So it's much more of a challenge for Reserve and National Guard families to find that support because they're spread out all over the place and they don't see each other all the time.
I think that's where online communities really can come to play, because you can connect with, if you're in a rural area or an area where there's not many people for that support system. I think having that online community to really connect and say, hey, this is going on, I'm not alone.
Absolutely, absolutely. Certainly being geographically isolated only tends to exacerbate the emotional or psychological isolation that a veteran or family member might otherwise be feeling already.
So what's the future? I want to, like this, how long has the program been going on? Do we answer that question?
About a year and a half.
About a year and a half. So it's in its infancy, we should say, right? You know what I was thinking as you're describing the reaction when you come home as a vet and, there's all the hoopla and everybody's excited and obviously happy to be home. It's kind of like when you have a baby, there's, the showers and everybody's excited and pregnancy, and then all of a sudden you have this person that you're responsible for and everything changes. And sometimes postpartum depression becomes a part of that. But it's not the same, but it's sort of...
No, it's interesting. I appreciate you sort of raising that as a loose analogy because it makes sense. And Senator Roy McDonald came and spoke to the initial 4 groups shortly before he left office. And Senator McDonald is a Vietnam veteran and somebody who I admire and respect greatly because of all the work he's done on behalf of veterans. And he said to the group of us who were heading up our respective programs that, parades are fantastic. They're great. Everybody throws confetti, and that's wonderful. But, parades are just parades. And when they're done, where is all the support from the communities? And I think that's one of the messages that we're trying to push out and to incorporate the community as a whole into helping out our veterans, because the community sent our men and women to war on their behalf. And then these men and women come back and they're experiencing difficulties. So we feel that it's only right that the community provide them support. It shouldn't just be up to their family members. It shouldn't just be up to the VA or some counselor. That community that lined the parade route or was there at the airport clapping for that veteran saying, welcome home, we support you. That's great to say that you support your veterans in your community, but the veterans would certainly appreciate it even more if you could show that support through action. And whether it's helping to fund a program or start a group or provide a forum. A lot of people say, geez, I'd love to help, but I just don't know. What can I do? Believe me, we'll find a way for you to help based upon your skills and your resources. And we really do appreciate those members of the community who have been so forthcoming.
Okay, let's be specific. You say, people do say that, and after the show they may say, what can we do? What can they do? And then I'm going to ask you what social workers specifically can do, but just the general community, if they're listening to the show and they say, well, how do we get in touch with you?
Right.
What can we do and how do we do it? Right.
Well, they can certainly go to our website, which is Heroes at Home Rensco, all one word, Heroes at Home, RENSCO.com. Or they could go to our Facebook page and read all about the program. They can learn how to become peer support volunteers if they want to get involved. They can contact us through the website, either give us a call or send us an email, and let us know who they are. And we'll work with them and figure out how to best incorporate them into our program. Perhaps they could host an event. Really depends on who they are and where they're coming from and what their skill sets are. But we will do everything that we can to try to include them and to thank them for their contribution in helping out our veterans, because these veterans really do sacrifice so much. I think it's, we've been at war for almost 13 years now, and to a certain extent, people become complacent about it. I remember when I came home from Afghanistan, a lot of people said, "Oh, geez, you just got home. Thanks for your service. How was Iraq?" Because that was the war that was on everybody's minds at the time. And now people are sort of focused on Afghanistan, and they forget about a lot of our Iraqi veterans. It's interesting how that happens, and it's a shame that it happens that way. But the collective consciousness and the collective memory in this country sometimes is very short, and certainly when it comes to our veterans.
We have a short-term memory
Absolutely,
problem.
absolutely. And it's important for us to remind our communities that they need to stay engaged with their veterans because of the sacrifice that they have made on their behalf.
Well, let's talk about social workers for a few minutes. We have
Sure.
a couple minutes left. So what can we do? I mean, we are the Social Workers Radio talk show, so we have
Sure.
social workers listening and thinking about, okay, what can our community, our professional community do to help you, to help
Right.
the Veterans Peer Program?
Well, certainly being aware of us as a resource is the first step, so that if you are working with a family of a veteran or a veteran themselves, that you're aware of our existence as a resource for that veteran or that veteran's family member. If you don't know we're out there, then it doesn't really do any good. So just having your listeners who are social workers aware of that is key, and having them understand what type of service we do provide. And I really can't overstate the significance of having somebody who has served be that peer support mentor or volunteer, if you will, because it's not that veterans don't like you if you're not a fellow veteran. It's just a matter of trust. And I'm sure as a social worker, that's one of the primary things that you focus on when trying to make sure that somebody receives the services that they need, is establishing that trust. And when it comes to veterans, my experience, personal experience, and the experience that I'm finding in this program is, it certainly bears that out, is that veterans are most comfortable talking to other veterans. There's a good friend of mine who used to work at the Albany Vet Center, who was a social worker, and he had said, when a veteran falls down in a well and he's crying out for help, and a police officer walks by and says, "Well, I'll have to go call the fire department," and then the priest walks by and says, "Well, I'll pray for you," and finally a veteran walks by and he jumps down into this deep well with the veteran, and the veteran down there says, "What on earth are you doing? Now we're both stuck down here." And he says, "I know, but I've been down here before and I know the way out." And that really encapsulates what type of service we're looking to provide. And so for social workers, it's important to understand the value of having peer support services for veterans and their family members, because once they know that you've gone through what they've gone through, maybe not the exact same experiences, but generally speaking, they're much more likely to trust you and to work with you to reconnect to society and become productive citizens again.
As far as social work goes, I mean, support groups, I think are the best. I think, and also when they are, the services are given alongside with professionals. I mean, that's another aspect to it. But I think any support group, don't you? I mean, when somebody has been through, as you say, you have to have been there,
Right.
Whether it's addiction or cancer or all of those kinds, any experience that I've had with support groups, They really do. They work. You have to have been there. So I think what you're doing is just amazing. And
thank
yeah,
you.
go ahead,
And
Alyssa.
I'm just really glad that you came on today because,
Yeah.
I mean, even talking to, I work on campus and talking to a lot of the social work students, there's so many who have a passion to work with veterans and to really, have this be their career focus of providing these services, and just to have you come on and having students be able to listen and have Dr. Hardiman right in the School of Social Welfare with this great resource and these information that students can have access to about, how they can help and what they can do. It's just, I'm really glad that that you both were on the show today to really reach out to the students as well and let them know what this, what is happening right in their community.
Great. Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity because, again, it only furthers our goal of making sure that our program is pushed out into the communities and people know about us and can take advantage of what we have to offer and can make our program better, because we don't have all the answers, but by getting people involved, we'll get better at it and we'll get more answers, and that's the whole goal here.
Well, awareness, you are the show of the month. So you are going to be on all month, once a week.
Okay.
So we want to get the, awareness is key. You're right. Joel Abelove, Director of Peer Services, Heroes at Home. Thanks so